Viewers, the world as we know it is fraying at the edges. Old rules are being written by executive fiat from the Oval Office. Global power is shifting away from the West, and supply lines are being drawn at warp speed as nations hedge their trade bets in a multipolar world. In this moment of global churn, like any other nation, India too finds itself at a crossroads. Courted or pressured by major powers, constrained by hard choices, and tested by uncertainty. Can India turn strategic autonomy into strategic influence? Can it convert economic promise into global power? And what does being the world's largest democracy mean when values long cherished seem increasingly sidelined globally? To unpack India's global moment, we are joined by one of the world's foremost thinkers on geopolitics, Mr. Fareed Zakaria. Mr. Zakaria, thank you very much for speaking to me. People sense that the world is becoming more unstable. Is the global order breaking down or just in some ways changing? And where does India fit into this new world, into this new jigsaw?
Gosh, it's a big question. I would say the world order is evolving. It is not breaking down. And it's important to take a slightly more historical perspective than a lot of the breathless news analysis of the last week or two have taken. The fundamental shift in the world order that we have had since 1945 obviously took place first with 1989, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then the entire world almost moved to the kind of Western free market, open world economy. But after that, the biggest shift has been the rise of China. In the rise of China, you had a non-market economy, or the fundamentally non-market economy, that was entering the system and was not really willing to play entirely by the rules of the system. And that became much more clear once Xi Jinping became the leader of China. Xi Jinping gave a speech in 2015, so this was 1 year before Donald Trump was elected, in which he said it is going to be the paramount goal of China to reduce substantially, if not eliminate, its dependence on the West in all the leading technologies of the future. And he outlined the whole series of technologies that he wanted to lessen, if not eliminate, dependence on the West. Now, that kind of attitude for the second largest economy in the world is incompatible with globalization, with an open world economy where the idea is we all buy and sell from everybody else, and everyone's mutual interdependence creates, a kind of incentive for everyone to cooperate. Then you get Trump. And Trump has consistently wanted, in a sense, a mirror image of what Xi Jinping wants. And now you have the two largest economies in the world searching for strategic autonomy, searching for, kind of strategic security, supply chain reliability, and resilience. And so that is the new world order that is evolving. As I say, it's evolving because, you can't really do it as easily as people think. In the United States, to give you one example, 90% of the penicillin we import, the precursor chemicals come from China. 60% of all computer chips we buy still come from China, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a world that is deeply interdependent, but there is a layer now of strategic autonomy that countries are looking for. And to put it very briefly, I'm sure we'll talk about it more, India can play in this world and prosper in this world quite well.
Well, you said prosper in this world quite well. Would that mean that India, could we assume, is shaping events, or is still mainly a country reacting to them?
It is mainly a country reacting to them. India is not yet in the first tier in the sense of power, economically, militarily, and so it is a rule taker rather than a rule maker. But India's great strength is that it has always tried to maintain a certain degree of strategic independence and autonomy. So it has good relations with Russia. It has good relations with the United States. It has good relations with Europe. It has decent relations with China. They have gotten a little better. The reality is that that kind of strategic autonomy or the ability to freelance is valuable in the world we're in today. I would have hoped that India and the United States could forge a kind of special relationship in which the United States, this is certainly what the United States had been aiming for 25 years, was to develop a very special relationship with India, develop a kind of new relationship economically, technologically, politically, diplomatically. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is so erratic, unpredictable, unreliable that it's entirely understandable that India has decided it needs more options. It needs the ability to hedge against the United States or away from the United States. It's something most countries are now searching for. And as I say, India already has, in a sense, developed those options with regard to China, with regard to other countries like Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa. So it comes naturally to India. India has that palette. It still remains true, though, that India needs a special relationship with the US if it is going to move up the value chain economically, technologically, if it wants to be really at the frontiers of technology and the frontiers of economic growth. It needs a better, a very close relationship with the US. And I still think that's possible. It will just be a more guarded relationship. It will be a relationship where India will retain certain autonomy and some options.
Right.
And frankly, that is largely because of the peculiar nature of Donald Trump's foreign policy.
No, so I'll come to that, but I just want to pick up from where you just left off. Yeah, strategic autonomy has been this leitmotif of our diplomacy over the last 10 years, especially under Narendra Modi. But is that becoming harder by the day to exercise? I mean, China is not a benign neighbor, as you know. The United States is at this moment behaving erratically with India, and sometimes from an Indian perspective, it looks even as if it is militating against India's interests. It's cozying up to Pakistan, for instance. There is also détente happening with China at some level, even though there is some sort of a shadow play going on there. I think you understand what I'm saying. There's talk of regime change in Bangladesh instituted by the United States deep state. I'm not getting into that because I don't have the facts, and none of us do. But is it becoming difficult to continue down this strategic autonomy path that we've chosen for ourselves?
No, I think it actually makes it easier because the United States' erraticism and unpredictability mean other countries are also looking for those kind of relationships. You just saw that with the European Union signing this big trade deal with India. I think you'll find that Canada and India will be able to mend their relationship quite well if both sides are willing to do it. I think there will be better relations with China than they have in the past. It's never going to be warm and friendly, but I think they can be better. And I think even with the United States, the truth is Trump is a very strange character, and some of what he does seems entirely kind of impulsive, emotional, personal. So you never know. He might shift his ground as he shifted his ground toward Pakistan very suddenly and unpredictably. He could just as easily shift away. I don't think it is an enduring American strategy to do what Donald Trump is doing. I think that Donald Trump's successor will return to the strategy that has been in place since Bill Clinton. I think Trump, it still remains largely inexplicable why Trump has moved away from India. It's possible that he really is as annoyed about this whole business of the Nobel Peace Prize and wanting to take credit for the ceasefire, between India and Pakistan. It could be that Munir, who is a very savvy guy, has wooed him. It could be there's some crypto connection. In any event, it all feels very specific to Donald Trump. It is not an American shift. Most America, as you know, in Congress, the India is, extremely positively viewed. in the public in general, India is very well regarded, and vice versa. I mean, I looked at recent poll numbers show that Indians remain very pro-American by and large. So I think that there's a much more enduring friendship that will last beyond the peculiarities of Donald Trump.
So here is a question that I must interrogate, because what you're saying, sort of going against a lot of what some experts here believe, that Trump's tenure is not an aberration, the MAGA base will outlive Trump, perhaps Trump is only the spout for their beliefs, he's only really the front-facing, at some level or the other, broadcaster of what they believe, and that fundamentally there is a disconnect, and this disconnect is going to play out. It has also contributed, of course, to Delhi looking at Washington with a little bit more skepticism.
So there is some truth to that, but in the sense that the MAGA base is, basically suspicious of foreigners. There's a certain degree of xenophobia. There's particularly toward Indian Americans, even because they've been very successful, and a certain maybe I don't know what, maybe resentment would be the right word, but certainly they view them less favorably until very recently. I'd say Indian Americans were kind of regarded as the poster children of good immigrants, assimilating, succeeding, working hard, all that kind of thing. The MAGA base, I think, views it somewhat differently. But in terms of foreign policy, the main drivers of MAGA foreign policy ideologically are more a kind of isolationism, a unilateralism, basically anti-Europe because they regard Europe as kind of a woke paradise, somewhat pro-Russian because they view Russia as a white Christian and non-woke nation, anti-Chinese. So India doesn't figure very largely one way or the other. And in the context of having an anti-Chinese policy, having stronger relations with India actually makes sense. I mean, Trump won, if you recall, the first term of Donald Trump was very much in that vein. Trump built on the strengthening ties with India. He and Modi got on very well, which is why I say this recent detour is a puzzle even to people in the administration, I can tell you, and certainly within the MAGA world. And I do think it relates a lot to Trump's personal idiosyncrasies. I think one cannot underestimate the degree to which Donald Trump really is obsessed with winning the Nobel Peace Prize and wants, powerful and important people like Modi to nominate him for it. You can see this. Trump is very transparent. When he gives speeches and he talks about how he dealt with the Swiss president on tariffs, or how much he wants the Nobel Prize, that he railed against the Norwegian prime minister, even though that prime minister has nothing to do with it. You see, Trump's, in a sense, you're getting an X-ray of his id, ego, and superego all at the same time. And those are the things that motivate him a lot more than some kind of carefully calculated national strategic purpose.
So ego-fueled bombast. Okay, but how will Delhi react to DC from here on? Is this relationship going to be dogged by apprehension? Are all those Cold War phantoms going to sort of come right back and haunt once again the Indian foreign policy establishment for years?
I hope not, because those Cold War phantoms, and you correctly put them as phantoms, first of all, derive from the Cold War and the fact that India was largely supporting the Soviet Union in that Cold War, and supported it on everything, including things like Cambodia, which was very controversial. It also, I would point out, was betting on the wrong horse. I mean, the Soviet Union lost the Cold War, and so it was an unwise strategy, in my opinion, for India. It ended up backing the loser, the country that collapsed. But more importantly, there is no Cold War now, right? And so India, to the extent that there is a new Cold War, and I wouldn't use that analogy too strongly, it's going to be between America and China, and India is, in that context, on the right side of this one. So I don't think you're going to replay the Cold War, but will there be a certain distance created by Trump and his foreign policy? Will some of the warmth in the relationship that had been produced by successive American presidents and successive Indian prime ministers working together, cooperating more, aligning their worldviews more? Yes, unfortunately, that is the damage of Trump's foreign policy. It's not just being felt in India, it will be felt in Europe as well. But that doesn't mean India, India doesn't thrive or flounder entirely on the basis of, how close it is to America. I think it would be better if it were closer, but India can forge an independent path quite easily.
So let me ask you, because you did refer to India's support of the Soviet Union on Cambodia and other controversial points in history, and pretty much the West has come around to think that how is it that a high-minded moral actor on the global stage could back Russia in the current context when it decides to sort of invade another sovereign country? And therefore, India, of course, when its question says, look, its Russia policy is practical. It's not ideological. It's not framed by any deep-seated love for Russia because Russia comes across as some morally correct power. Is that an honest assessment by New Delhi, or are ties dictated by strategic ennui? Let me use that word.
Look, I wish that India were a little more forthright about what is really, a violation of the core principles of the United Nations Charter and a very unusual invasion. There are very few since 1945 naked acts of aggression and conquest that the conqueror is then seeking to legitimize. If you think about it, you'd have to, there are very, very few cases where this has happened. And so India, as a important member of the UN and the world community, and if it wants to be a rule maker, should be taking a stronger position, in my view. It doesn't mean it has to go all the way. It doesn't mean it can't have good relations with Russia. But I wish it did take a somewhat tougher line on this. But I think it is possible to be pragmatic, to be realistic, and say, look, we have a long-standing relationship with Russia, which we don't want to jeopardize entirely. There's certain practical realities of needing oil and things like that, which you could play on. And I think that it comes less out of that sense of strategic nostalgia and more out of a practical sense of the realities of the world today, all of which have been reinforced again by Donald Trump's foreign policy. He has made it less attractive to India to be pro-American and to back the Western position on this issue. He's made it more difficult for the West to hold a moral high ground to this regard with his intervention in Venezuela, which was not UN backed, not using international law as a justification, not putting together a coalition to gain greater legitimacy. And certainly it has been undermined by his bizarre talk about annexing Greenland, which in a sense would seem to justify Russia's aggression. I mean, if the Russians can take a neighboring piece of territory and the Americans do the same, what's the difference other than the United States is intimidating its neighbors into doing it rather than outright conquest? It's still a kind of forcible annexation. So Trump has, in a sense, been a great gift to the old, foreign affairs hands in New Delhi who have dreamt about, non-aligned foreign policy and worry about getting too close to the Americans. Trump has given every justification to those people. As I said, I don't think it's going to last, and I think what Trump is doing is profoundly not in America's best interests. But there we are, and so India's position seems more understandable.
Yes, I mean, look, India has justified the relationship with Russia, citing practicalities. But I want to ask you, Russia is pretty much yoked to China. If you just look over and see that relationship, And if one were to be practical, then one might take a sort of dim view of the Indian position, saying that, look, does India's relationship with Russia still guarantee it leverage over China? I mean, does it work? Does it compute?
So you're raising a very fundamental issue, and this is why I have been strongly in favor of a much closer American-Indian relationship. I believe that the fundamental geopolitical fact of the 21st century has been the rise of China, which is becoming essentially the most important peer rival to the United States in 100 years. The only real peer competitor that can compete at every level, technological, economic, military, political. And in that context, India needs to have a fundamental reassessment of its foreign policy, not a kind of incremental one. What China is trying to do is to build an alliance network that looks suspiciously like it is surrounding one country, which is India. Pakistan is now a satellite of China. Russia, as you say, is becoming a satellite of China. Afghanistan is likely to have much closer relations with China going forward. Myanmar, Burma, as we know, has much closer relations with China. They have tried to, through port acquisitions, have a foothold in Sri Lanka. What does this look like? It looks like the encirclement of India. And, frankly, that is other than Taiwan, that is the most important set of strategic moves that China has taken in the last 10 or 15 years. And it makes sense because China must view India as the other great power in Asia that it has to worry about. So in that context, it seems to me that India should be trying to develop a much stronger, closer relationship with the United States. And the virtue here is that India and Indian businesses would be delighted to see that. It would help India technologically, economically, politically, they're both democracies. It's Indian civil society and American civil society could make broader alliances. It would be a kind of country to country, people to people alliance rather than just a state to state, a government to government alliance, which is always the most rich and enduring kind of relationship. So there's a very strong strategic rationale for it. My point is just I can understand New Delhi's apprehension given the bizarre way in which Trump is behaving,
Yeah.
self-defeating in my view toward America, but India has to take into account he is the president. He's going to be around for another 3 years.
And it's not just Trump, Mr. Zakaria. History tells us that the Americans haven't always been the most reliable allies, specifically in our part of the world, in the East. And perhaps, maybe, I don't know, Delhi therefore hedges its bets.
This is a common something you hear often about the United States, and I think what it misunderstands is the reality of democratic politics and a democratic superpower that naturally has shifts in political parties and as a result shifts in kind of the nuances of those policies. But actually, the United States has been, in its fundamental terms, extraordinarily consistent. Think about it. The United States built this world order in 1945.
Yeah.
It has been the guarantor of that order since 1945 for 80 years. What other country has had an 80-year strategy that it has fulfilled, not just in terms of talk, but in terms of actual security guarantees, expenditures, and such? US soldiers are still on the banks of the Rhine. They are still in Okinawa, Japan. They are still in South Korea. They are still in all the places that they promised to be 80 years ago. What other country has been that consistent? The Soviet Union, which collapsed. Nazi Germany, which was around for 10 years. The imperial powers of Europe, which all had to decolonize and collapsed. I don't understand. This is a kind of common, conventional wisdom that simply does not bear the test of serious analysis. The United States has been remarkably consistent. That's why Trump is such a strange aberration. Trump is trying to unravel some of this. We'll see if he succeeds in the long run.
Well, it's got 2.5 years left and a midterm election, so he may not, but who knows, he might stand again. Never know with Trump. But let me ask you, because, in a world where power often trumps values, does being a democracy help India or hold it back?
Oh, it powerfully helps India. I think, look, India couldn't be run in any way that was not a democracy. It's too big, it's too diverse. The states are too autonomous. I think if you were to try to run India as a dictatorship, it really wouldn't work. We did have a 2 year experience. I was living in India at the time, and it just did not, it was almost like something alien had been planted on the body politic. Remember, China is 95% Han Chinese. They all speak the same language. They're all the same ethnicity. It's very different. Um, I think India has a great opportunity here, which is to be one of the world's leading democracies, to strengthen its democracy at home rather than weakening it in some areas, which I worry about a lot. Freedom of press, independence of judiciary, independence of election commission and institutions like that. These are areas where India should be moving to strengthen democracy, not weaken it. And it would be able to speak with a loud and clear voice. Look, at the end of the day, who sets the agenda in the world? It is still the world's major democracies, the United States, Britain, France, Germany. This is not an accident. It's because nobody thinks that, the world wants to go in the direction of Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Iran or South Korea or North Korea, right? There is enormous soft power that comes from having a government that is seen as sanctioned by the people, legitimized by the rule of law, and the independence of institutions. That's one of India's great strengths. And, look, for the last 30 years, India has engaged in economic reforms while being a democracy. It hasn't held it back. If you wanted to be very simple about this, India has grown roughly the same pace ever since they opened up the economy. If you look at the annual growth rates. Um, and India is poorer than China now, basically because China began its reforms 10 years earlier, not because China was some great, that its dictatorship allowed it to grow much faster. China began its reforms in 1979. India began its reforms in 1992. That is probably the single biggest explanation for China's outperformance rather than the fact that they were a dictatorship. Yeah, they can build stuff faster, and their roads are more straight. There's a wonderful study which shows that in dictatorships, roads tend to be very straight, connecting two places, and in democracies, they tend to be very curvy because they have to take into account political constituents and people and all that. I'm okay with having curvy roads if that respects the rights and dignity of people and it slows you down a bit. But India's done fine, and India will continue to do fine as a democracy.
Well, Mr. Zakaria, you just knocked me off my pedestal because I thought this was my original theory. I was telling my wife when I went for the first time to Tianjin that the roads here are very straight and this must be the reason. And I didn't know this was already documented. Well, I want to ask you this because this is interesting. India often calls itself a civilizational power. It wants to be a Vishwa Guru, which means a teacher to the world in a sense. What does that actually... Okay,
you don't have to try.
Okay, well, what does that actually mean in practice on the global stage?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that this is more a kind of fancy term, searching for a fancy phrase, searching for a strategy. Um, what does it mean to be a civilizational power? I think India should be proud of its civilization. It should recognize that it has a very rich and diverse civilization. This is one of the, again, unique features of India, or at least very special features of India, that India has long traditions in Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, even Christianity. I mean, if you go to Goa and see some of those churches that are from the 17th century, it's really extraordinary. Um, but I don't know how you translate that into foreign policy. I think that it suggests that India has a certain kind of depth and richness and kind of a solidity to it. But let's contrast that with the United States, which is a very young civilization, but a very powerful country and a very powerful state, and it has been the world's leading power. I don't think the United States stands out in the world as being the oldest civilization in the world. Far from it, right? So just as being a very young civilization has not hurt America in exercising world power, I'm not sure being a very old civilization will help India, but it's certainly something Indians should take pride in.
Very Zakaria, lovely speaking with you. Thank you very much for taking the time out. We spent 40 odd minutes with you and it's been riveting. Thank you.
Wonderful conversation. Thank you, Rob.